They constructed an impeccable apparatus in quaint municipalities where wayfarers vanish into confines, adjudicators who had never encountered a black individual they couldn't condemn, officers who fabricate evidence as routinely as they issue citations. A system so refined, so lucrative, that it operated without oversight for 2 decades. However, machines possess a vulnerability. They cannot differentiate between prey and predator. Thus, when they apprehended Darius Carter on a tranquil road in Mill Creek, they believed they had captured their next victim. Instead, they discovered their executioner, for Darius possessed something none of their previous targets had, a sibling capable of dismantling their system from the highest echelon of American jurisprudence. Sometimes, corruption does not require a hero. Sometimes, it merely necessitates the wrong individual in handcuffs. Before we resume, I would love to know your location today, and if you are enjoying these narratives, be sure to subscribe, as tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely do not want to overlook. Darius Carter drummed his fingers against the steering wheel of his Mercedes S-Class, replaying the triumphant pitch meeting in his mind. The late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the deserted highway as he navigated through uncharted territory. His GPS had recommended the shortcut through the small town of Mill Creek, promising to reduce his travel time home by 30 minutes. The sleek black vehicle purred smoothly along the serpentine road, its gleaming surface reflecting the golden light of the hour. Darius adjusted his Italian silk tie, a power move that had served him well during the presentation. At the age of 42, he had mastered the skill of commanding attention in boardrooms, yet something about this unfamiliar town made him feel uneasy. The Welcome to Mill Creek sign loomed ahead, its paint peeling at the edges, population 15,000. The kind of place where everyone was aware of everyone else's affairs, and outsiders stood out like ink stains on pristine paper. Darius checked his fuel gauge. A quarter tank, sufficient to reach home, albeit cutting it closer than he preferred. A small gas station appeared on his right, its weathered sign advertising prices seemingly frozen in the previous decade. He signaled and pulled in, parking beside one of the 4 available pumps. The moment he exited his vehicle, he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. 2 elderly gentlemen seated on wooden chairs outside the station's convenience store halted their conversation mid-sentence. A woman loading groceries into her SUV hastily finished and rushed to leave. Darius maintained his composure, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket as he approached the pump. Inside the store, the clerk's gaze tracked his every movement as he approached the counter. "Pump 4, Darius stated, pulling out his platinum card. The clerk, a slender man with a patchy beard, accepted the card with visible reluctance. "You passing through?" The question carried an edge suggesting it wasn't merely friendly small talk. "Yes, sir. Just need to refuel, and I'll be on my way," Darius replied, keeping his tone professional and courteous, much like how he dealt with challenging clients. The clerk swiped his card and returned it without making eye contact. "Pump's ready." Back outside, Darius felt the weight of unseen stares as he filled his tank. The gas pump clicked rhythmically, each sound echoing in the tense silence. He noticed a police cruiser parked across the street, its occupants observing with excessive interest. As he replaced the nozzle, his phone vibrated. A text from his brother Jordan. "How'd the meeting go?" "Knocked it out of the park," Darius typed back. "Taking a shortcut home. This town gives me strange vibes, though." Jordan's response was immediate. "Stay safe, little brother. Call if you need anything." If only he realized how prophetic those words would become. Darius pulled out of the gas station, acutely aware of the police cruiser that smoothly merged into traffic behind him. He maintained exactly the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. The cruiser followed at a steady distance, akin to a shark trailing its prey. The town's main street stretched before him, lined with brick buildings that had seen better days. Faded awnings hung over vacant storefronts, and the few pedestrians on the sidewalk seemed to intentionally avoid glancing at his car. The entire scene felt like a powder keg awaiting ignition. After 5 minutes of this tension, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Darius's heart rate quickened, but he remained outwardly calm as he signaled and pulled over to the shoulder. He had been through this before. The key was to stay composed and professional. 2 officers emerged from the cruiser. The taller one approached his window while his partner lingered back, hand resting casually on his holster. Darius kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. "License and registration," the officer demanded without preamble. His nameplate read Langley. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, Officer Langley?" Darius's voice remained steady as he slowly reached for his wallet. "Your right tail light is out," Langley replied, his tone laced with satisfaction. "That's impossible," Darius countered. "I had the car serviced last week." He handed over his license and registration, noting how Langley's partner, Officer Decker, had moved to inspect the back of the vehicle. "Step out of the car, sir." Langley's hand shifted to rest on his belt. "Officer, I checked all my lights this morning. They were functioning perfectly. I said step out of the car. The command came more forcefully this time, brooking no argument. Darius complied, moving with deliberate slowness. The gravel crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes as he stood. I'd like to see this broken tail light for myself. Hands against the vehicle, feet back, Langley ordered, his voice shedding any pretense of professionalism. You seem awfully concerned about that tail light. Maybe that's because you're trying to conceal something else. Darius felt rough hands pat him down as Officer Decker approached with a familiar small bag in his gloved hand. Look what I found in the trunk, partner. That's not mine, Darius asserted firmly, his mind racing. I demand to see your body camera footage of this search. You didn't have probable cause or my consent to open my trunk. Langley's laugh was cold. Guys like you always believe you're above the law, always spouting fancy words about probable cause and rights. Well, guess what? The drugs were in plain sight when you opened your trunk at the gas station. That's probable cause right there. That's a lie, and you know it. Darius kept his voice steady despite the anger boiling in his chest. I never opened my trunk at the gas station. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut punctuated his words. You have the right to remain silent, Decker began reciting as he roughly guided Darius toward the cruiser. You're making a serious mistake, Darius warned as they forced his head down to enter the back seat. Through the window, he could see passing cars slowing down to observe the unfolding scene. Some drivers shook their heads, while others seemed to smile with grim satisfaction. Inside the cruiser, the police scanner crackled with static before a voice emerged. Looks like we got another one. Decker and Langley exchanged knowing glances in the rearview mirror as they pulled away from the shoulder. Darius sat in rigid silence, his mind already formulating strategies. They had no idea who they were dealing with or, more importantly, who his brother was. The drive to the police station was brief but fraught with tension. Darius observed every detail, noting street names and landmarks. The station itself was a squat brick building with windows tinted so dark they appeared black. A few other patrol cars were parked outside, their presence making the building resemble more of a fortress than a public service facility. As they ushered him inside, Darius caught his reflection in the glass doors. His expensive suit now wrinkled, his meticulously maintained appearance disrupted by their rough handling. But his eyes conveyed no fear, only calculated resolve. These small-town officers thought they had ensnared an easy target. They were about to learn just how mistaken they were. The booking area reeked of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. A desk sergeant looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from boredom to intrigue as he took in Darius's appearance. Well, the sergeant drawled. What do we have here? Found this one trying to transport product through our town, Langley announced, pushing Darius forward. Fancy car, fancy suit. Probably thought he was too clever to get caught. I want my phone call, Darius stated firmly, and I want to file a formal complaint about these officers planting evidence in my vehicle. The sergeant's eyebrows shot up. Planting evidence? That's a serious accusation, boy. Better watch that mouth of yours. It could land you in even more trouble. The booking process was deliberately slow, each step drawn out with unnecessary questions and paperwork. They took his fingerprints, photographed him from multiple angles, and conducted a more thorough search. Throughout it all, Darius remained silent, memorizing faces and names, noting every procedural violation. Finally, they led him to a holding cell. The metal door clanged shut with ominous finality. Through the bars, Darius could see Langley and Decker conversing in hushed tones with the sergeant, occasionally glancing in his direction with smug satisfaction. A police scanner mounted high on the wall crackled again. Sheriff Reynolds wants an update on the situation. The voice was different this time, more authoritative. Tell him we've got it handled, the sergeant responded. Subject is secured. D.A. Clayton has been notified. Darius leaned back against the cold concrete wall, his mind racing through the implications. This wasn't merely a random case of racial profiling. It was too organized, too rehearsed. The planted drugs, the coordinated response, the immediate involvement of the DA, this was a system, not an isolated incident. He closed his eyes, thinking of his brother Jordan. The U.S. Attorney General would be very interested in what was transpiring in this small town. But first, Darius needed to survive long enough to make that call. The cell was small, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made time feel suspended. Through the small window high in the wall, Darius could see the sky darkening. Rush hour traffic would be building up on the highway by now. He should have been halfway home. Instead, he was here, caught in what was clearly a practice scheme. He thought about the woman at the gas station who had hurried away, the elderly men who had stopped talking. How many others had they watched being set up like this? How many lives had been devastated by this corrupt system? Footsteps approached his cell. Officer Langley appeared, twirling a key ring around his finger. Comfortable in there, big shot? Hope you're not too accustomed to those fancy hotel rooms you probably stay in. Darius met his gaze steadily. You know, Officer Langley, there's still time to do the right thing. Whatever scheme you're orchestrating here is bound to unravel eventually. All schemes do. Langley's smirk faltered slightly. You think you're real smart, don't you? You think you can talk your way out of this? We've got you dead to rights, drugs in your trunk, resisting arrest. Resisting arrest? Darius's laugh was sharp. Your body camera footage will show otherwise. Oh wait. Let me guess. There was a malfunction with the recording. Keep running that mouth, Langley growled. DA Clayton will be here soon. Maybe he'll be interested in hearing all your theories about schemes and setups. As if on cue, the station's front door opened, and new voices joined the mix. Darius could hear the shuffle of expensive shoes on linoleum, the murmur of important conversations being held just out of earshot. Throughout it all, he maintained his composure, waiting for his moment. They would have to grant him his phone call eventually, and when they did, everything would change. These small-town corrupt officials had no idea what was coming their way. The station grew quieter as night shift personnel replaced the day crew. Darius watched the changing of the guard, noting how certain officers avoided eye contact while others seemed to revel in his predicament. Each detail was another piece of evidence to be utilized later. Finally, after what felt like hours, he heard the words he had been anticipating. All right, hotshot, time for your phone call. The fluorescent lights of the Mill Creek police station cast harsh shadows as Darius was led back to his cell. His single phone call still denied. Officer Langley's earlier smugness had transformed into something darker, more calculated. The night shift was settling in, bringing with it an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the jingle of keys and a deep voice that radiated authority. Sheriff Thomas Reynolds appeared, his brass badge gleaming under the artificial light. He was a tall man with graying temples and cold eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. Mr. Carter, Reynolds drawled, drawing out each syllable as he approached the cell. Causing quite a stir in our quiet little town, aren't you? His smile never reached his eyes as he scrutinized Darius through the bars. I'd like to make my phone call now, Darius stated firmly. It's my right. Reynolds chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. Rights? You know what's interesting about rights, Mr. Carter? They're akin to rules in a game. Sometimes the players decide to create their own. He leaned closer to the bars. Your type doesn't receive special privileges here. The casual racism in his tone made Darius's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composed exterior. My type? You mean successful businessmen who are aware of their rights under the law. Getting smart with me won't improve your situation. Reynolds straightened up, adjusting his gun belt. We found drugs in your vehicle. That's a serious offense in Mill Creek. We take our war on drugs very seriously here. Those drugs were planted, Darius replied evenly. And we both know it. Reynolds's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation against my officers. Very serious indeed. Perhaps we should add attempting to intimidate law enforcement to your charges. The station's front door opened again, and new footsteps approached, more measured, accompanied by the soft rustle of an expensive suit. District Attorney William Clayton appeared, his presence filling the narrow corridor. He was younger than Reynolds, with meticulously styled hair and a sharp suit that exuded ambition rather than service. Well, what do we have here? Clayton's voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of a man who spent his days persuading juries of whatever truth he chose to present. Another drug runner thinking he can utilize our roads as his personal highway? Mr. Clayton, Darius acknowledged, noting how the DA's arrival had shifted the power dynamic in the room. I assume you're here to investigate the illegal search and seizure of my vehicle, along with the planting of evidence by your officers. Clayton's laughter was practiced and dismissive. According to the report I just examined, those narcotics were plainly visible, and considering your demeanor, I'm not surprised that you're attempting to hold our esteemed officers accountable for your own poor decisions. Through the window of a nearby office, Darius caught glimpses of shadows moving behind the one-way glass. More observers watching the unfolding drama, likely other officials entangled in whatever scheme was in motion. Look on the bright side, Clayton continued, pulling up a chair and sitting down with deliberate nonchalance. If you cooperate, perhaps we can come to an arrangement. A guilty plea, some community service. He paused, letting the implication linger in the air. Otherwise, with your prior record, you're facing a minimum of 15 years. Prior record? Darius's voice conveyed genuine astonishment. I don't have a prior record. Clayton made a show of reviewing a file he had brought with him. That's intriguing because I'm looking at quite an extensive rap sheet here. Multiple arrests for drug possession across 3 states. It seems you've been quite active, Mr. Carter. Darius felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't merely planting physical evidence. They were fabricating entire criminal histories. This was far more intricate than simple racial profiling. In the cell adjacent to his, a man stirred in the shadows. Darius hadn't noticed him before. The man's face was bruised, and his business attire was wrinkled and dirty. Their eyes met briefly, and the man whispered, "They framed me 2-3 days ago. Don't trust any of them." "Quiet in there, Jackson," Reynolds barked, shooting a warning glare at the other cell. Clayton stood, straightening his tie. "I'll give you some time to contemplate your options, Mr. Carter, but don't take too long. My offer won't remain on the table indefinitely." As Clayton and Reynolds walked away, their voices echoed down the corridor. "Think he'll break?" "They all do eventually." Left alone once more, Darius processed what he had learned. The fabricated criminal record, the coordinated pressure, the other prisoner with a similar tale. This wasn't merely corruption. It was an organized operation. Hours passed, and the station's activity continued around him. Officers coming and going, paperwork being filed, phones ringing in distant offices. Throughout it all, Darius observed and listened, constructing a mental map of the station's operations. A young officer, barely out of the academy by the looks of him, approached with a cup of water. His nameplate read Officer Peters. Unlike the others, his expression held a hint of uncertainty. "Here," Peters said quietly, passing the cup through the bars. "You should drink something." "Thank you," Darius replied, studying the young man's face. "How long have you been on the force, Officer Peters?" Peters glanced nervously over his shoulder. 3 months. "And how many arrests like mine have you witnessed in those 3 months?" The young officer's discomfort was palpable. "I'm not supposed to talk to the prisoners," he stammered. "Because you might start questioning things," Darius pressed gently. "Start wondering why so many out-of-town businessmen suddenly turn into drug dealers when they pass through Mill Creek?" "I said I can't talk about it," Peters repeated, but his voice wavered. He turned quickly and walked away, his footsteps hurried. Through the high window, Darius could see the sky beginning to lighten. He had been there all night, denied his phone call and basic rights, but each hour had granted him further insight into the corruption surrounding him. The station grew busier as morning shift personnel arrived. Darius caught fragments of conversations, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "Another arrest means we'll hit our quota for the month. The feds can't argue with our numbers now. Reynolds says this one's perfect. Successful enough to have cash, no local connections." A door opened, and Officers Langley and Decker entered, looking fresh and ready for another day of corruption. They were accompanied by 2 detectives Darius hadn't seen before, their badges marking them as part of the drug task force. "Ready to make this easy on yourself?" Langley asked, pulling out a typed confession. "Sign this, and maybe you'll see daylight again before you're too old to enjoy it." Darius didn't even glance at the paper. "I want my phone call." "Still playing that game?" Decker sneered. "Maybe another few hours in here will change your mind." The detectives exchanged glances, and the taller one spoke up. "We could expedite his processing if he cooperates. The DA's office is pushing for quick resolutions on these cases." "Quick resolutions?" Darius repeated. "You mean railroad innocent people into guilty pleas to pad your statistics?" "Innocent?" Langley laughed. "We found drugs in your car. Multiple witnesses saw you acting suspiciously at the gas station. And with your record." "My manufactured record," Darius corrected. "Created sometime between my arrest and D.A. Clayton's arrival." A flicker of unease crossed one detective's face. He pulled Langley aside. Their whispered conversation was barely audible. "Are you sure about this one? He seems different." Langley waved off the concern. "They all think they're special at first. He'll break." The morning wore on, and more officers paraded past his cell, each trying different tactics. Good cop, bad cop, threats, promises. A well-rehearsed performance that had likely broken many others before him. Throughout it all, Darius maintained his composure, watching and listening. He noticed how certain officers deferred to others, how information flowed through specific channels, and how the hierarchy of corruption operated. Around noon, D.A. Clayton returned, this time with a court-appointed defender in tow. The lawyer was a nervous man named Frank Wilson, whose rumpled suit and defeated expression suggested he was either part of the scheme or had long ago given up fighting it. "Mr. Carter," Wilson began, his voice lacking any real conviction, "I've reviewed your case, and given the evidence against you, I strongly recommend accepting the DA's plea deal." "Evidence?" Darius raised an eyebrow. "You mean the planted drugs and fabricated criminal record? Have you even looked at the arrest report, checked for body camera footage, verified the chain of custody for the alleged evidence?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "The officer's testimony will be interesting to hear under oath, especially when they have to explain why their body cameras weren't functioning, why they searched my vehicle without consent or probable cause, and why their arrest report contradicts basic facts that any decent investigation would reveal." Clayton stepped forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Mr. Carter. The offer expires at the end of the day. After that, we proceed with the full weight of charges." "Then I suggest you proceed," Darius replied calmly. "And I suggest you prepare for what comes next." Something in his tone made Clayton pause. The DA studied him more carefully now, perhaps seeing something in Darius's composure that others had overlooked. "Check his phone records," Clayton ordered a nearby officer. "I want to know who he's been in contact with." The next hour brought increased activity around the station. Officers huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. Papers were shuffled, files reviewed, and phone calls made in low tones. In his cell, Darius waited patiently. They would have to give him his phone call eventually. Department policy required it, and despite their corruption, they still needed to maintain the appearance of proper procedure. Finally, Officer Peters approached again, this time with Sheriff Reynolds beside him. "Your phone call," Reynolds announced, his tone suggesting he was granting a great favor. "Make it count." As Darius was led to the phone, he caught snippets of conversation from the dispatch desk. "They're pushing to exceed last month's numbers. The mayor wants an update on the seizure totals. Make sure those property forfeitures are processed correctly." Each word confirmed what he had suspected. This wasn't merely about racial profiling or corrupt officers. This was a systematic operation designed to generate arrests, seizures, and forfeitures, a machine that transformed passing travelers into statistics and profit. Standing at the phone, Darius took a deep breath. They had no idea what they had started when they pulled over his car, no idea who they were truly dealing with. His fingers moved over the keypad, dialing a number he knew by heart. His brother's number, the number that would change everything. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then a familiar voice answered. "Jordan Carter speaking." Behind him, Darius heard the shuffle of feet as officers moved closer, trying to hear the conversation. He smiled slightly, knowing that their entire corrupt world was about to be shaken to its core. "Jordan," he said clearly, watching Reynolds' face from the corner of his eye. "I need your help. I'm being held at Mill Creek Police Station on falsified charges. And brother, you're not going to believe what I've uncovered here." The phone receiver felt warm against Darius's ear as his brother's voice filled the line with quiet authority. Behind him, Sheriff Reynolds and the other officers leaned in, their earlier smugness giving way to curiosity. "Tell me everything," Jordan Carter commanded, his tone carrying the weight of his office without broadcasting it. "I was driving through Mill Creek when Officers Langley and Decker pulled me over," Darius began, watching Reynolds' face. "They planted drugs in my car, denied me my phone call for hours, and fabricated a criminal record." Jordan's breath caught slightly. "Are you hurt?" "No. But there's another man here, Jackson, who wasn't so lucky." Darius kept his voice steady. "They've been running this operation for a while, brother, targeting specific travelers, falsifying evidence, pushing plea deals." A pause filled the line as Jordan processed this information. When he spoke again, his voice carried deadly precision. "Put the sheriff on." Reynolds stepped forward, smirking as he took the phone. "This is Sheriff Thomas Reynolds. And who might you be?" "This is United States Attorney General Jordan Carter." The words fell like hammer blows in the quiet room. "And you're holding my brother illegally." The color drained from Reynolds' face. Officer Langley, who had been lounging against the wall, straightened up so quickly he nearly lost his balance. The room's atmosphere shifted from predatory to panicked in an instant. "Sir, I think there must be some mistake," Reynolds stammered. "We found narcotics in his vehicle during a routine traffic stop." "Did you now?" Jordan's voice could have frozen hell. "Tell me, Sheriff, are your officers' body cameras working today? I'll be very interested in reviewing that footage along with your department's arrest records for the past 5 years. Reynolds' hand trembled slightly as he held the phone. "Sir, I assure you we followed all proper procedures. Save it for the federal investigation. Jordan cut him off. I'm mobilizing resources as we speak. In the meantime, my brother better receive proper treatment. If he so much as gets a paper cut, I'll add personal liability to the charges. The sheriff's face had gone from red to ash white. Of course, sir. We'll ensure Mr. Carter's comfort and safety. One more thing, Jordan added. Every officer involved in this arrest is now under federal investigation. I suggest you all think very carefully about your next moves. Cooperation might be the only thing standing between you and a federal prison cell. Reynolds set the phone down with unsteady hands. The other officers had backed away from Darius, creating a respectful distance that bordered on fear. Through the station windows, Darius could see Officer Peters practically running to his computer terminal. Get him out of that cell, Reynolds barked, fumbling with his keys. And somebody find D.A. Clayton now. The station erupted into controlled chaos. Officers scrambled to their desks, desperately deleting files and shredding papers. Phones started ringing as word spread through Mill Creek's corrupt justice system that the U.S. Attorney General was about to rain hell upon them. Darius was quickly escorted to an interview room, this one considerably more comfortable than his cell. Coffee appeared before him, along with apologetic offers of food and water. The transformation was almost comical, from hardened criminal to honored guest in the span of one phone call. D.A. Clayton burst through the door, his usual composure shattered. Is it true? The U.S. Attorney General. My older brother, Darius confirmed, taking a slow sip of coffee. He's always been very protective of family. Clayton slumped into a chair, his face ashen. This can't be happening. Do you have any idea what we've built here? A racket targeting innocent travelers? A scheme to generate false arrests for federal funding? Or is it something even bigger? Darius leaned forward. Want to tell me about those property seizures I heard mentioned before? Before Clayton could respond, the station's front doors burst open. FBI agents poured in, their blue windbreakers a stark contrast to the small-town police uniforms. Leading them was Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, her badge gleaming as she strode directly to where Reynolds stood frozen. Sheriff Reynolds, she announced, her voice carrying across the now-silent station. We have a warrant to seize all departmental records, electronic devices, and evidence related to arrests made in the past 5 years. Reynolds found his voice, though it quavered. This is unprecedented. We have proper procedures. Your procedures are exactly what we're here to investigate. Mitchell cut him off. She turned to her team. Secure every computer. I want full access to their booking system, evidence logs, and financial records. Officer Langley made a move toward his desk, but an FBI agent smoothly stepped into his path. Step away from the computer, officer. That's now federal evidence. The next hour was a symphony of federal efficiency. Agents swept through the station, securing files and equipment. Officers were separated and interviewed in different rooms. The sound of shredders had been replaced by the hum of federal forensics teams. Darius observed everything from his now comfortable position, noting how swiftly the power structure had disintegrated. Officer Peters sat with an FBI agent, engaging in animated conversation, clearly deciding that cooperation was his best course of action. Other officers huddled in corners, whispering urgently into their phones, undoubtedly contacting attorneys. A familiar face appeared in the doorway. The man from the neighboring cell, Jackson, now released and being attended to by paramedics. He caught Darius's eye and nodded appreciatively. D.A. Clayton had been reduced to a nervous wreck, his earlier arrogance replaced by sheer terror as he watched federal agents meticulously box up years' worth of files from his office. Every so often, he glanced at Darius with a mixture of animosity and desperation. Sheriff Reynolds wasn't faring much better. Special Agent Mitchell had him cornered, methodically dismantling his story. So, you're suggesting it's merely a coincidence that your department's drug arrests tripled during the month preceding federal funding reviews? We're just doing our jobs, Reynolds protested weakly. Your job includes fabricating evidence. Mitchell's voice was razor-sharp. Because we've already uncovered some intriguing discrepancies in your booking photos. Timestamps that don't align with video footage, evidence logs with inconsistent weights. The sheriff's face went even paler. A younger FBI agent approached Mitchell with a laptop. Ma'am, you need to see this. We discovered a hidden folder of spreadsheets tracking their quotas. They've been targeting specific demographics, calculating potential seizure values based on victims' apparent wealth. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Document everything and get cyber forensics in here. I want to know who else had access to these files. Outside, news vans had begun to arrive, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers in the police station parking lot. Local reporters, who had long ignored the department's suspicious arrest patterns, were now frantically trying to catch up to the story. Darius's phone buzzed. Another text from Jordan. How are you holding up? Better now, he typed back. Your timing was perfect. Stay put. I'm landing in 30 minutes. And brother, this is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. As if to confirm Jordan's words, Mitchell's voice carried across the station. Sir, we're discovering similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions. This isn't isolated to Mill Creek. Officer Peters approached Darius cautiously, his youthful face troubled. Mr. Carter, I should have spoken up sooner about what they were doing. It's not too late to do the right thing, Darius assured him. Peters nodded and walked over to where Mitchell was organizing interviews. Another domino falling, another crack in the corrupt foundation. Through the station windows, Darius could see more FBI vehicles arriving. Agents in cyber-forensics gear unloaded equipment, preparing for an in-depth examination of the department's digital records. The small-town cops who had seemed so powerful just hours ago now appeared small and frightened. D.A. Clayton made one last attempt to salvage the situation, approaching Darius with what he likely thought was a reasonable expression. Mr. Carter, surely we can come to some arrangement. This whole situation is just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Darius's voice was cold, like the misunderstanding that placed Jackson in that cell or the ones that filled your private prison quotas. Clayton's face revealed that Darius had struck another nerve. Private prisons, another thread to pull. The DA backed away, nearly bumping into an FBI agent who was boxing up his files. Every drawer opened revealed new evidence of corruption. Falsified reports, doctored photographs, spreadsheets tracking quotas and seized assets. A young officer Darius hadn't seen before rushed in, his face pale. Sheriff, there's a helicopter landing at the municipal airport. They're saying it's the Attorney General himself. Reynolds looked like he might faint. He's coming here personally? Did you think he wouldn't? Mitchell asked with grim satisfaction. When you arrested his brother on falsified charges? The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, and even through the station's windows, Darius could see the sleek black aircraft descending. Jordan had always had a flair for dramatic entrances. Officers who had been trying to maintain their composure finally broke. One began openly crying at his desk, while another started shouting about how he had been coerced into participating. Langley and Decker, the original architects of Darius's arrest, sat in separate rooms with federal agents, each presumably trying to blame the other. The station door opened again, and a hush fell over the room. Jordan Carter stood in the doorway, his 6 feet 2 inches frame commanding immediate attention. His tailored suit and stern expression radiated authority, but his eyes softened slightly when they fell on Darius. Brother, he said simply, crossing the room in long strides. Are you all right? I am now, Darius replied, standing to embrace him. Though I think we've stumbled onto something much darker than a simple false arrest. Jordan's expression hardened as he surveyed the chaos surrounding them. Agent Mitchell, what have you found? This extends far beyond Mill Creek, she reported. We're observing evidence of a coordinated effort across multiple jurisdictions. False arrests, asset seizures, quota systems, and connections to private prison contractors. Darius added. Clayton's reaction when I mentioned it was intriguing. Jordan nodded slowly, his mind clearly mapping out the larger implications. Special Agent Mitchell, I want every electronic device in this building analyzed, every piece of paper documented, and every officer interviewed. Already in progress, sir, she confirmed. And Sheriff Reynolds. Jordan turned to where the once proud lawman stood trembling. I suggest you contact your attorney. Though given what we're uncovering, you might want to consider being the first to cooperate. It could influence where you serve your time. Reynolds slumped in defeat, the last vestiges of his authority crumbling. Through it all, Darius watched the systematic dismantling of Mill Creek's corrupt power structure. What had started as a routine act of racial profiling had exposed something far more sinister. As he caught his brother's determined expression, he knew this was just the beginning. The truth about Mill Creek was about to shake the foundations of law enforcement across the country, and it all began with one wrong traffic stop. Evening shadows crept across the Mill Creek police station as federal agents continued their methodical investigation. Darius sat in what had once been the sheriff's office, watching the controlled chaos through the window. Jordan had been pulled into an urgent conference call with his DOJ task force, leaving Darius to observe the department's disassembly. A subtle movement caught his eye. Jackson, the man from the neighboring cell, stood in the doorway, but something had changed. The nervous, defeated posture was gone, replaced by alert professionalism. Mind if I join you? Jackson asked, closing the door behind him. He pulled out a federal badge, letting it catch the light. Special Agent Marcus Jackson, DOJ Civil Rights Division. I've been undercover here for 3 months. Darius leaned forward, reassessing the man before him. 3 months? Then you know how deep this goes. Deeper than anyone suspected, Jackson confirmed, taking a seat. Your arrest actually helped us. We needed someone they couldn't intimidate or buy off. someone with connections they couldn't predict. Through the office blinds, they watched Officer Langley being escorted to an interview room, his earlier swagger replaced by barely contained panic. "They've been running this scheme for years," Jackson continued, his voice low, "targeting successful minorities passing through town, planting evidence, and pushing for plea deals. The ones who fight back get hit with fabricated prior records and pressure from every angle. But it's not just about racial profiling," Darius observed. "Look at the way they track assets, coordinate with the DA's office. This is about money." Jackson nodded grimly. "Federal funding, asset seizures, private prison kickbacks. Mill Creek is just one piece of a larger network. These small towns form a chain along major travel routes, each one feeding into the same system." A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Peters entered, his young face etched with determination. "Agent Jackson, those files you asked about? I found them hidden in a secure server under the label Budget Forecasts." "Show me," Jackson ordered, standing quickly. Darius followed them to a computer terminal, where Peters pulled up a series of spreadsheets. The innocuous-looking documents told a chilling story: projected arrest quotas, demographic targets, estimated asset values, and something labeled facility compensation rates. "They actually documented everything," Darius murmured, scanning the data. "They were so confident in their power that they kept records." "Arrogance makes for good evidence," Jackson agreed. He turned to Peters. "How did you get access to these?" The young officer shifted uncomfortably. "I was supposed to start next month," Sheriff Reynolds stated. "Is my opportunity to demonstrate my loyalty to the department." A commotion from the main office drew their attention. Special Agent Mitchell was confronting DA Clayton, who had apparently attempted to exit the building. "Going somewhere, Mr. Clayton?" Mitchell's voice carried clearly. "Because these documents indicate you've been coordinating similar operations in at least 3 other counties." Clayton's usual poise had completely shattered. "I want my lawyer. I'm not saying another word without representation." "You might want to choose your attorney wisely," Mitchell advised coldly, "because the first individuals to cooperate with our investigation will receive consideration. The rest—" She let the implication linger ominously in the air. Jackson turned back to the computer, pointing out key entries. "See these transfer codes? They match patterns we've observed in other jurisdictions. Small towns feeding into regional holding facilities, then into private prison systems. Each step generates profit, kickbacks, and federal funding." "And Reynolds?" Darius asked. "Where does he fit in?" "Middle management," Jackson explained. "He enforces the quotas, maintains the local operation, and takes his cut. But the true power lies higher up. Prison contractors, corrupt judges, politicians." A sudden shadow in the doorway made them turn. Jordan stood there, his expression serious. "I just got off the phone with the DOJ task force. Things are worse than we thought." "Tell me," Jackson said, straightening in his chair. "We've identified similar patterns in 12 other towns across 3 states, each with the same setup: corrupt police forces and compromised, cooperative judges. It's systematic." Darius processed this information. "How many innocent people?" "Hundreds," Jackson interjected. "Maybe thousands. Some took plea deals out of fear. Others were railroaded through rigged trials, all feeding bodies into private prisons." Jordan moved to study the spreadsheets on Peters's screen. "Officer, what can you tell me about these facility codes?" "They're used to track where each prisoner is sent," Peters explained, his voice heavy with guilt. "Different facilities pay different rates. The higher security ones bring in more money. That's why they fabricate prior records." Darius realized, more priors mean higher security classification, which means more profit. Jackson finished. "The entire system is designed to maximize returns. They even have preferred demographics, educated professionals who can work complex jobs in prison industries." A young FBI tech burst into the room, laptop in hand. "Agent Jackson, we cracked their encrypted email server. You need to see this." The screen displayed years of correspondence between Mill Creek's leadership and various corporate entities. Coded language discussed revenue optimization, demographic targeting, and judicial compliance. "Look at this one," Mitchell said, pointing to a particular email. "Monthly bonus structure based on conviction rates and asset seizures. They've turned justice into a business model." Jordan's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. DOJ just found offshore accounts linked to Judge Harrison. He's handled over 60% of Mill Creek's drug cases in the past year, all guilty verdicts. Peters added quietly. He never rules against the department because he's being paid not to, Mitchell concluded. We're finding similar patterns with other judges in the network. Darius watched the evidence accumulate, each revelation more damning than the last. What had begun as his wrongful arrest was unraveling a conspiracy that spanned states and corrupted entire justice systems. Through the window, he could see Sheriff Reynolds crumbling under interrogation in another room. The man who had denied him his phone call now sat defeated, spilling secrets to save himself. "We've got problems," another agent announced from the doorway. "We just intercepted a call from Clayton to someone named Senator Phillips. They were discussing containment strategies." Jordan straightened his tie. "Robert Phillips, head of the Judiciary Committee?" "The same," the agent confirmed. Clayton told him, and I quote, "Carter's brother is here. The whole operation could be compromised." "So it goes higher than judges," Darius observed. "Politicians are involved too." Jackson nodded grimly. "Makes sense. You need political protection to run something this big. Friendly committee members to approve judicial appointments, legislators to maintain private prison contracts. And now they're scared," Mitchell added with satisfaction. "They should be. This is RICO territory, racketeering, corruption, civil rights violations. The whole network's going down." Officer Peters spoke up hesitantly. "There's more in the evidence room. There are boxes of case files, cold cases where suspects resisted arrest and ended up dead. I always thought something felt off about them." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. This wasn't just about false arrests and rigged trials anymore. There were potentially murders to investigate. Jordan turned to his brother. "Your arrest might have saved lives, Darius." They were getting bolder, more confident. "If we hadn't caught them now, how many other towns are out there? How many other networks like this?" Darius wondered aloud. "We'll find them," Jackson promised. "This investigation is just the beginning. Once we flip a few key players, get them talking about the larger operation." A commotion erupted in the main office. Officer Langley was being led back to holding, but he was shouting, "I want immunity. I can give you names. Judges, politicians, prison board members. They're starting to turn on each other," Mitchell observed with satisfaction. "Fear does that. Each one trying to cut a better deal than the last." Jordan's phone buzzed again. He read the message, a grim smile forming. "DOJ just froze the assets of Regional Correctional Services, the private prison company linked to most of these cases. Their stock is already plummeting." "Good," Jackson said firmly. "Hit them where it hurts, their profits. These people only understand money." Darius moved to the window, watching the ongoing federal operation below. More agents were arriving, along with what looked like forensic accountants and computer specialists. The small-town police station had become the epicenter of a national investigation. "We need to move carefully," Jordan cautioned. "These people have resources and connections. They'll fight back once they realize how much we know." "Let them," Mitchell replied. "Every move they make, every call they try to cash in, it just gives us more threads to pull, more evidence to collect." Peters looked up from his computer. "Agent Jackson, I found something else. Looks like weekly reports sent to someone called the committee. Details about arrests, assets, conviction rates." Jackson leaned in to study the documents. "The committee? We've heard that name before, a high-level oversight group very careful about electronic traces. This could be our link to the top." "The corruption goes all the way up," Darius mused. "From street cops to senators, and now we can prove it." Jordan stated firmly, "Every spreadsheet, every email, every offshore payment. It's all evidence." They documented their own conspiracy. Through the station's windows, they could see news vans beginning to arrive. Local reporters who had ignored suspicious patterns for years were suddenly very interested in Mill Creek's police department. "We should get ahead of this," Mitchell suggested. "Control the narrative before they start spinning it." Jordan nodded. "I'll make a statement, but keep it focused on Mill Creek for now. We don't want to tip our hand about the larger investigation." Darius watched as a handcuffed Officer Decker was led to a transport vehicle. His head bowed. The man had helped arrest him just hours ago, confident in his power. Now he was headed to federal custody. "What happens next?" Darius asked his brother. "We build the case," Jordan replied. Every connection, every payment, every fake arrest. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but we're going to dismantle this entire corrupt machine. Jackson stood, straightening his jacket. I should get my official statement on record while everything's fresh. 3 months undercover. I've got a lot to tell the investigators. Officer Peters, Mitchell called. We'll need your testimony too. Detailed accounts of everything you witnessed, every file you can access. The young officer nodded firmly, his earlier uncertainty replaced by determination. I'll tell you everything. It's time someone did the right thing in this department. As the others filed out, Darius remained by the window watching the scene below. In just hours, his wrongful arrest had triggered an avalanche that was burying decades of corruption. But he knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, powerful people were making calls, destroying evidence, preparing their defenses. The real fight was still to come. Jordan joined him at the window. You okay, brother? Better than okay, Darius replied. For the first time since I was pulled over, I feel like something good might come from all this. Something good, Jordan agreed, watching another corrupt officer being led away. And something big. By the time we're done, the whole broken system will be exposed. Below them, Agent Mitchell was organizing teams for the next phase of the investigation. The small-town police station had become ground zero for a corruption probe that would shake the foundations of America's justice system, and it all started with one traffic stop on a quiet afternoon in Mill Creek. Night had fallen over Mill Creek Police Station, but inside, the fluorescent lights burned bright as ever. DA William Clayton sat alone in his office, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed life. His fingers trembled as he dialed a number he'd been warned to use only in emergencies. We have a situation, he whispered into the phone. They're not just looking at the arrests anymore. They found the offshore accounts. The voice on the other end was cold and controlled. Handle it. You don't understand, Clayton hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. The Attorney General himself is here. They're pulling files going back years. My assistant is already talking to the feds. A pause. Then, your assistant knows about the records? Lisa handles all the paperwork. She knows. She knows everything. Then you know what needs to be done. Clean house, William. Quickly, the line went dead. Clayton stared at his phone, understanding the implications. Down the hall, his assistant Lisa Parker was still talking to federal agents, unaware of the order just given. In another part of the station, Sheriff Reynolds was reaching his breaking point. Special Agent Mitchell had been questioning him for hours, laying out evidence of years of corruption. Let's talk about Marcus Wright, Mitchell said, sliding a photograph across the table. Successful black business owner passing through Mill Creek last year, arrested on drug charges, died in custody, officially ruled a suicide. Reynolds's face went ashen. I can't. Can't what, Sheriff? Can't explain why the autopsy photos don't match the official report? Can't justify why the security cameras malfunctioned during his death? Or can't live with what you helped cover up? Before Reynolds could respond, an urgent knock interrupted them. An FBI agent entered, his expression grim. We just intercepted a call from the station's landline. Someone contacted a burn phone registered to Regional Resource Management. They're mobilizing something called Protocol Zero. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Get me everything we have on Protocol Zero and put a protection detail on every potential witness. Meanwhile, Darius and Jordan were reviewing evidence with Agent Jackson when Officer Peters burst in, his young face pale with fear. You need to see this, he said, hands shaking as he pulled up an encrypted email on his phone. It just came through on the department's secure server. Someone's ordering a hit on Lisa Parker, Clayton's assistant. Jordan moved instantly, grabbing his phone. Mitchell, we need immediate protection for Lisa Parker. They're trying to silence her. Through the station's windows, they could see Lisa leaving the interview room, unaware of the danger. A corrections officer they didn't recognize was following her, one hand concealed beneath his jacket. Get her, Jordan shouted. Agent Jackson moved with trained precision, intercepting the corrections officer just as he reached for something in his jacket. The resulting scuffle was brief but violent. When it was over, agents found a loaded syringe in the man's pocket, a lethal dose of something that would have looked like a heart attack. Who sent you? Mitchell demanded as they cuffed him. The would-be assassin just smiled. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Lisa Parker stood trembling as agents rushed her to safety. The color drained from her face. They were going to kill me, but I've worked with these people for years. That's exactly why, Darius explained gently. You know too much. In his office, Clayton was frantically deleting files when agents burst in. They caught him trying to feed documents into a shredder, documents that detailed payments to judges, kickbacks from private prisons, and something labeled demographic targeting protocols. It's not what you think, Clayton stammered as they secured the evidence. Really? Mitchell asked, picking up a half-shredded paper. Because it looks like instructions for your officers on which types of travelers to target, complete with racial profiles. Down in the holding cells, Sheriff Reynolds had finally broken down. You don't understand, he sobbed to the federal investigators. When I tried to back out last year, they sent me photos of my family, my grandchildren at their school. They own us all. Agent Jackson was coordinating with other undercover operatives across state lines. Reports were coming in about similar cleanup attempts at other corrupt departments. Files being destroyed, witnesses threatened, and evidence vanishing. They're burning it all down, he reported grimly, trying to contain the damage. Jordan's phone buzzed with an urgent text from his DOJ team. Senator Phillips just called an emergency closed-door session of the Judiciary Committee. They're trying to shut down our investigation. Like hell they are. Jordan growled, already dialing Washington. Darius watched the chaos unfold, noting how the corrupt system was revealing itself through its desperate attempts at survival. Every cover-up attempt, every threat, every deleted file was just more evidence of how profound the corruption ran. Officer Peters approached, clutching a stack of papers. I found something else, records of other suicides in custody. All successful minorities, all passing through town, all with substantial assets that were seized. How many? Mitchell asked sharply. 17 in the past 3 years, just in Mill Creek. The room fell silent as the weight of the implication sank in. This wasn't merely corruption anymore. It was murder for profit, sanctioned by the very system meant to prevent such atrocities. Suddenly, the station's power went out, plunging everything into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows. They're trying to knock out our computers, an FBI tech shouted. Cyber attack on the station systems. But Jordan smiled grimly. Too late. We've been copying everything to a secure DOJ server since we arrived. They can't erase what we already have. In the dim light, they could see Clayton being led away in handcuffs. His expensive suit wrinkled, his arrogance replaced by raw fear. As he passed Darius, he whispered, "You have no idea what you've started. They'll never let you expose this." "Who's they?" Darius demanded. Clayton just laughed, a hollow sound. "Why do you think small-town cops and local DAs could run something this big? We're just the visible part. The real power, you'll never touch them." Agent Mitchell stepped forward. "Want to bet? Because we just found your offshore accounts, Clayton. All those wire transfers, all those numbered accounts, they tell quite a story. And guess what? Money leaves trails, trails that lead right to your bosses." The DA's face went pale. In another room, Lisa Parker was giving her statement, her voice shaking but resolute. They had quotas not just for arrests but for assets. They called it resource optimization. Each arrest had to yield a minimum value in seized property. If officers didn't meet their quotas, they'd be transferred or worse. And the judges? Mitchell pressed. All appointed through Senator Phillips's committee? They had a system, Lisa explained. Certain judges for certain cases. Judge Williams handled drug seizures. Judge Blackwood took care of any cases that might expose the scheme. It was all coordinated. Outside, more FBI vehicles were arriving. The local news crews had been joined by national networks, their satellite trucks filling the parking lot. The story was getting too big to contain. Jordan was on the phone with his DOJ team. "I want every judge named in these documents investigated, full financial audits back 20 years. And get me everything you can on regional resource management, corporate records, tax returns, board members." Agent Jackson emerged from the evidence room, his face grim. "I found another set of books. They were tracking everything. Arrest quotas, asset values, even attrition rates in custody. They treated it like a business." "It was a business," Darius corrected. "A business built on destroying lives." The station's power suddenly returned, computers rebooting one by one. The FBI tech looked up from his laptop. "They tried to wipe the servers, but we caught it and traced the attack. It came from a law firm in Washington. The same firm that represents Senator Phillips." Mitchell smiled coldly. "Add that to the evidence pile. Their panic is making our case for us." Through the station windows, they could see Sheriff Reynolds being led to a transport vehicle, his head bowed. The man who had run Mill Creek like his personal fiefdom now looked small and broken. Officer Peters approached Darius, his young face troubled. "There's something else you should know. Before all this started, they had a meeting about you, after you were stopped but before the arrest. They pulled up your background, saw your success and your connections. That's why they pushed so hard to make the charges stick. You were supposed to be their biggest score yet. Instead, I'll be their last," Darius replied firmly. Jordan's phone buzzed again, his expression darkening as he read the message. "Senator Phillips just called an emergency press conference. He's going to try to spin this as a few corrupt local officials to contain the damage." "Let him try," Mitchell said. "We have paper trails linking him directly to judicial appointments in every corrupt jurisdiction. And those judges' offshore accounts all trace back to the same name, shell companies. The night wore on, but the station remained a hive of activity. Federal agents processed evidence, interviewed witnesses, and built their case piece by piece. The corrupt machine was being dismantled, its inner workings exposed to the light. Lisa Parker's voice carried from the interview room. The private prison contracts were just the beginning. They had deals with everything: prison labor programs, commissary services, even medical care. Every aspect of incarceration was monetized. In another room, they could hear Langley finally breaking down. "I'll tell you everything about the judges, the quotas, the whole system. Just protect my family, please." Darius stood at the window, watching the news vans multiply. Tomorrow, the story would break. The world would learn about Mill Creek's corrupt machine, about similar operations across the country, about a system that turned justice into a commodity. Jordan joined him, his tie loosened after hours of work. "You okay, brother?" "I keep thinking about the others," Darius replied quietly. "The ones who didn't have a U.S. Attorney General for a brother. The ones who took plea deals out of fear or worse. We'll find them," Jordan promised. "Every case, every conviction, we'll make it right." But before Jordan could say more, Mitchell burst in. "Sir, we have a problem. Someone just sent orders to all the connected departments. They're calling it the nuclear option, mass document destruction. System wipes everything. They're trying to bury it all." Jackson realized. "Too late," Jordan said grimly. "We've got enough, and every attempt to cover it up just gives us more evidence of conspiracy." A young agent rushed in. "Sir, Judge Blackwood was just caught trying to board a private plane. And you'll never guess who chartered it," the agent continued. "Regional Resource Management. Better. The plane is registered to a subsidiary of the private prison company, the same company that's been paying kickbacks to Senator Phillips." The pieces were falling into place, each revelation leading to another. The corrupt machine was vast, but it was no longer invisible. As midnight approached, its architects were learning a hard truth. No system, no matter how powerful, could survive exposure to the light. The Oakwood Bar and Grill sat on the outskirts of Mill Creek, its neon sign flickering in the late-night darkness. Inside, Sheriff Reynolds, D.A. Clayton, and 3 senior officers huddled in a back booth, their voices low and urgent. Empty whiskey glasses littered the table, liquid courage for men watching their world collapse. "The feds are everywhere," Officer Langley muttered, his usual swagger replaced by barely contained panic. "They're going through everything. Arrest records, evidence logs, financial documents." Clayton's perfectly pressed suit was wrinkled now, his collar dark with nervous sweat. "We need to coordinate our stories. If we all stick to the same narrative." "Narrative?" Reynolds cut in, his voice harsh. "They have the files, William, all of them. Your precious narrative won't explain away offshore accounts and falsified evidence." The bar's door swung open, letting in a blast of cool night air. Judge William Blackwood entered, his judicial authority stripped away by fear. He slid into the booth, ordering a double scotch with trembling hands. "My office is being searched as we speak," Blackwood announced. "They're pulling records of every case I've handled in the past decade. The DOJ is cross-referencing my rulings with the payment schedules they found in Clayton's files." Outside, unseen by the corrupt officials, federal surveillance teams documented every entrance and exit. Agent Mitchell's voice crackled over secure channels. "All targets are in position. Strike teams, stand by." Back at the police station, Darius watched the operation unfold on multiple screens. Jordan stood beside him, his presence radiating controlled fury, as they prepared for the next phase of their fight against the corrupt machine. Through concealed microphones, they listened to the corrupt officials. "They're terrified," Darius observed, finally realizing the magnitude of their actions. "Good," Jordan replied. "Fear makes people careless. It makes them talk." Inside the bar, the conversation grew increasingly desperate. Reynolds drained another glass, his face flushed. "We should have eliminated Carter when we had the opportunity. We could have made it look like just another suicide in custody." Clayton's head snapped up. "Keep your voice down, and don't discuss the other incidents. Not here, not ever." "Why not?" Langley laughed bitterly. "The feds already know. They found the hidden case files, all 17 suicides, complete with the actual cause of death reports we buried. In the surveillance van, Agent Mitchell keyed her radio. "Did you capture that? Full confession to multiple murders. Move in on my mark." The corrupt officials were too preoccupied with their panic to notice the unmarked vehicles surrounding the bar. FBI teams took up positions at every exit while DOJ agents prepared to serve multiple federal warrants. Blackwood was still talking, his words slightly slurred. "I can't go to prison. Do you know what they do to judges inside, especially judges who've sent innocent men to their deaths?" "None of us are going to prison," Clayton declared, but his voice lacked conviction. I've made some calls, friends in high places. They'll protect us. Reynolds snorted. Like they protected Judge Harrison? He's singing like a bird to the feds right now, trading everything he knows for a lighter sentence. The mention of Harrison sent a fresh wave of panic through the group. The judge had been part of their scheme from the very beginning, signing off on illegal searches and rubber-stamping asset seizures. Outside, Jordan received a text from his DOJ task force. Harrison gave up everything. We have names, dates, account numbers, green light for mass arrests. He nodded to Agent Mitchell. Take them. The bar's door burst open as federal agents poured in from every entrance. The corrupt officials barely had time to register what was happening before they were surrounded by drawn weapons and shouted commands. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Clayton attempted to flee but made it only 2 steps before being tackled by an FBI agent. Judge Blackwood simply slumped in his seat, all pretense of dignity gone. Reynolds reached for something under his jacket but froze when 3 laser sights appeared on his chest. I wouldn't, Agent Mitchell advised coldly, stepping forward. William Clayton, Thomas Reynolds, James Langley, William Blackwood. You're all under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of murder. As agents began reading their rights and applying handcuffs, Jordan entered with Darius beside him. The brothers' presence sent a visible shock through the corrupt officials. You, Reynolds spat, glaring at Darius. You destroyed everything. No, Darius replied calmly. You destroyed everything. Every life you ruined, every innocent person you framed, every murder you covered up. That was all you. I merely helped expose it. Mitchell approached with a thick stack of federal indictments. Gentlemen, these warrants outline charges including, but not limited to, conspiracy to violate civil rights, corrupt organization, evidence tampering, multiple counts of first-degree murder, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Clayton's legal mind kicked in through his panic. We want deals, all of us. We have information about higher-level involvement. Higher level? Jordan stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. You mean Senator Phillips, Regional Resource Management, the private prison executives? We already have their files, thanks to your meticulous record-keeping. The color drained from Clayton's face as Jordan continued. Your offshore accounts were particularly helpful. Amazing how money can be traced, isn't it? Every payment, every kickback, every bribe. It all leaves a trail. Outside, news vans were already arriving, drawn by the fleet of federal vehicles. Camera crews captured the moment as the corrupt officials were led out in handcuffs, their expressions a mixture of defeat and terror. This is just the beginning, Mitchell informed them as they were loaded into transport vehicles. We're rolling up your entire network. Every corrupt cop, every botched judge, every politician on the take. Back inside, FBI teams were documenting the scene, recording the positions of glasses and napkins with hastily scribbled notes. Evidence of the officials' desperate last meeting. Jordan's phone buzzed with updates from other jurisdictions. Similar arrests happening in 12 other towns. Federal teams hitting corrupt departments simultaneously. Darius watched the operation unfold, reflecting on how his simple traffic stop had triggered this avalanche of justice. How many innocent people did they hurt? Too many, Jordan answered grimly. But we'll find them all. Every false conviction, every seized asset, every covered-up death. We will make it right. At the station, Lisa Parker was still providing evidence to federal investigators. They kept 2 sets of books, she explained, pulling up files on her computer. One for official review, one for their real operation. The second set tracked everything. Racial profiles of targets, asset values, even success rates for each officer. Agent Jackson joined them, his undercover work finally complete. We found similar systems in every corrupt department. They turned racial profiling into a business model, complete with quotas and performance metrics. Outside the bar, Clayton was making one last desperate attempt to save himself. I want to talk about the private prison contracts, about the kickbacks to state officials. Save it for your formal statement, Mitchell advised. And remember, the first ones to cooperate get consideration. The last ones get the full weight of federal charges. The night air was filled with the sounds of sirens as more federal vehicles arrived. News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights illuminating the scene as more corrupt officials were brought in from around the county. Jordan received another urgent update. Senator Phillips just tried to board a private jet at Reagan National. FBI teams intercepted him on the runway. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee? Mitchell mused. That's going to make headlines. Inside one of the transport vehicles, they could hear Reynolds breaking down. They told us we were untouchable. They said they had judges and politicians in their pocket. You were all touchable, Jordan replied. Every single one of you. And now you're going to face justice. Real justice, not the corrupt system you created. Darius watched as the last transport vehicle pulled away, carrying the architects of Mill Creek's corrupt machine to federal custody. But something in Clayton's earlier words nagged at him. He said they turned racial profiling into a business model, Darius noted. But businesses have owners, investors, people with real power. Jordan nodded grimly. That's our next target. The private prison executives, the corrupt politicians, the financiers who profited from all this suffering. This isn't over. It's just moving to a bigger stage. FBI teams were still processing the bar, documenting the final meeting of Mill Creek's corrupt leadership. Each napkin with hasty notes, each recorded conversation, each panic-driven confession would become evidence in what was rapidly becoming one of the largest corruption cases in American history. Agent Mitchell approached with a tablet displaying more arrested officials from other jurisdictions. It's working exactly as we planned. The simultaneous raids caught them all off guard. No time to coordinate stories or destroy evidence. And Senator Phillips? Jordan asked. Crying about congressional immunity? Mitchell smiled. But we have his signature on private prison contracts, offshore account transfers, even emails about managing investigations. He's going down with the rest. Through the bar's windows, they could see Officer Peters talking to federal agents, providing details about the department's operations. The young officer had chosen the right side of history, and his testimony would help ensure justice. Darius turned to his brother. When does the press conference start? In 1 hour, Jordan replied. Time to tell the world about Mill Creek's machine and all the others like it. Time to shine a light on every dark corner of this corrupt system. As they left the bar, the brothers paused to watch federal teams continuing their work. What had started with one wrongful arrest had exposed a nationwide network of corruption. But as Clayton's words echoed in Darius's mind, he knew the real fight was just beginning. The visible part of the machine had been dismantled. Now it was time to take down the power behind it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Mill Creek Federal Building as Jordan Carter approached the podium. Camera crews from every major network jostled for position, their satellite trucks filling the parking lot. Behind him stood Darius, Agent Mitchell, and a row of federal officials. A united front against the corruption that had been building for this moment. Last night, Jordan began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, federal agents executed simultaneous raids across 3 states, arresting over 40 law enforcement officials, judges, and public servants involved in a widespread corruption scheme. This morning, I stand before you to detail the full scope of their crimes. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Jordan held up a thick document. This federal indictment outlines a criminal enterprise that turned our justice system into a profit center. They targeted innocent travelers based on race and apparent wealth, falsified evidence, and coerced plea deals, all to feed a network of private prisons and generate illegal profits. Inside the building, FBI teams were processing the arrested officials. Sheriff Reynolds, his uniform now replaced by prison orange, sat slumped in an interview room. Agent Jackson watched through one-way glass as the man who had terrorized Mill Creek finally broke down. The private prison contracts were just the beginning, Reynolds confessed, his voice hollow. Regional resource management provided everything, the quotas, the targeting profiles, even templates for falsifying evidence. They called it revenue optimization, but it went deeper than anyone knows. In another room, D.A. Clayton was making his own deal, his perfectly pressed suit wrinkled from a night in federal custody. Senator Phillips wasn't just protecting us. He was directing operations. His judicial appointments, the private prison contracts, the offshore accounts, it was all connected through the board. Agent Mitchell entered with a fresh stack of files, her expression grim. We found something interesting in Judge Blackwood's records. Monthly reports sent to someone called the board. Performance metrics on conviction rates, asset seizures, prison populations. This was a business operation disguised as law enforcement. The board. Clayton's face went pale. You don't want to know about them. Trust me. They make people disappear, not just criminals but anyone who threatens their operation. Oh, but we do. Mitchell leaned forward, her voice steely. And you're going to tell us everything, starting with the 17 deaths in custody that conveniently got ruled suicides. Meanwhile, Darius was reviewing evidence with federal prosecutors when Officer Peters burst in, clutching a laptop. You need to see this, Judge Harrison's files. They show payments going back 15 years, but not just to him, to dozens of judges across multiple states. They were building a network of corrupt courts. The evidence room had become a hub of activity as federal teams processed mountains of seized documents. Each file revealed new layers of corruption, new connections to power players they hadn't even suspected. The wall of evidence grew by the hour, covered with photos and documents linked by red string. A web of corruption that stretched from small-town police stations to the highest levels of government. Jordan's press conference continued outside, his voice carrying through the building's windows. As of this morning, federal agents have seized over $30 million in illegal assets. We've frozen accounts connected to corrupt officials, private prison contractors, and their political enablers. But this is just the beginning. A reporter raised her hand, her voice cutting through the murmur. Mr. Attorney General, sources say Senator Phillips was arrested trying to flee the country. Can you confirm his involvement in this conspiracy? Senator Phillips is in federal custody, Jordan confirmed, his expression grave. And the evidence suggests his role went far beyond simple corruption. He appears to have been a key architect of this criminal enterprise, using his position on the Judiciary Committee to approve corrupt judges and protect the operation. Back inside, Agent Mitchell was interrogating Judge Blackwood, whose aristocratic composure had crumbled under the weight of evidence against him. "Tell me about the board," she demanded, spreading photographs across the table. "Who sits on it? Who controls the operation?" Blackwood's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. "They're untouchable corporate executives, prison industry leaders, people with real power. We were just their tools, their public face. When someone threatened the operation, the board handled it." "Untouchable," Mitchell replied, sliding another document forward. "Just ask your associate, Senator Phillips. He's already divulging information about offshore accounts and shell corporations, about murders disguised as suicides, and about judges being compensated to convict innocent individuals." On the opposite side of the building, Lisa Parker was collaborating with FBI cyber teams, decoding years of encrypted communications. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed concealed files and secret correspondences. "Look at these email chains," she pointed to her screen, highlighting crucial passages. "They're not merely discussing Mill Creek. They're coordinating similar operations across dozens of jurisdictions. They refer to it as demographic resource management, a euphemism for systematic racial profiling for profit." "How extensive does this go?" Darius inquired, studying the intricate web of data scrolling past. "We're discovering connections to private prison boards, security contractors, and even international investment groups," a cyber analyst replied, pulling up new documents. "They've transformed racial profiling into a billion-dollar industry. Every wrongful arrest, every seized asset, every prison sentence feeds into their profit machine." Jordan's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read it. The CEO of Regional Resource Management just called an emergency board meeting behind closed doors at their corporate headquarters. "Not closed enough?" Mitchell smiled, holding up a warrant freshly issued by a federal judge. "We have probable cause for wiretaps and surveillance. Every word they utter will serve as evidence in Washington." Senator Phillips sat in a federal holding cell, his power and privilege stripped away. Through his lawyer, he had already begun negotiating, desperately trying to save himself from the consequences of what he had helped create. "My client is prepared to provide comprehensive information about the board's operations. Names, dates, financial records, everything." The news of Phillips's cooperation sent shockwaves through the corrupt network. In boardrooms and private offices across the country, powerful individuals began to panic. Phones rang with urgent calls, documents were shredded, and flight plans were hastily filed. A mysterious figure watched the coverage from a dimly lit office in Washington's most exclusive district. The man's expensive suit and commanding presence marked him as someone accustomed to wielding power from the shadows. His private line rang, a number known only to a select few. "This is becoming a problem," the voice on the other end stated flatly. "Carter is digging too deep. If he connects us to the board, to Project Legacy." "It's contained," the man replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the office's perfect climate control. "The Attorney General isn't just following the money. He's dismantling our entire operation. And his brother's case gives him the perfect cover: racial justice, civil rights. The press is eating it up, and the public is demanding answers." Back in Mill Creek, Darius was reviewing documents when something caught his eye. "These aren't merely arrest quotas," he realized, spreading the papers across the table. "They're demographic projections. They were planning future targeting operations, expanding into new jurisdictions. This is going to go nationwide." Agent Jackson nodded grimly, pointing to specific entries. "We found similar documents in other departments. They were constructing an empire based on false arrests and asset seizures. Each department funneled prisoners into the private prison system. Each judge received their cut, and each politician protected the operation. Perfect machine." The federal building buzzed with activity as more evidence poured in. FBI teams had raided Regional Resource Management's offices, seizing computers and files. Each new document revealed more connections and more powerful players involved in the conspiracy. Jordan joined them, his expression grave. "I just got word from DOJ. They found a pattern in judicial appointments across multiple states. Every corrupt judge we've identified was approved by the same Senate committee, Phillips's committee. Mitchell confirmed, adding another photo to the evidence wall. But Phillips wasn't working alone. Jordan continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. The pattern goes back 20 years, spanning multiple committee chairs. This was systematic. They were installing corrupt judges to protect their operation. Outside, protesters had begun to gather, their signs demanding justice for victims of the corrupt system. Families of those wrongly convicted held photos of their loved ones. The human cost of the conspiracy was becoming impossible to ignore. In the evidence room, Lisa Parker made another discovery that made her gasp. These financial records show regular payments to a company called Strategic Corrections Partners. But when I look them up, they don't exist. It's another shell company laundering millions in illegal profits. Follow the money, Mitchell ordered, dispatching more agents. Every transfer, every account. I want to know where these payments really went. Who owns the shell companies? Who controls the accounts? Darius watched the investigation unfold, reflecting on how his wrongful arrest had initiated this avalanche. But something still nagged at him. They're scared, he observed, watching the panic spread through the corrupt network. Not just among the local officials but also the individuals at the top. Why? What are we getting close to? Because we're approaching something much bigger, Jordan replied, reviewing new evidence. The board isn't just about private prisons. This is about power, about controlling who goes to prison and who profits from it. It's about turning justice itself into a commodity. Agent Jackson entered with new information, his face flushed with excitement. You need to see this. We found recordings of board meetings. They're not just discussing current operations. They're planning expansion, new jurisdictions, new targeting protocols. They're not finished. Darius realized, scanning the documents. Even with all these arrests, they were planning to continue expanding. Not if we can help it, Jordan stated firmly. Every piece of evidence, every cooperating witness brings us closer to the top. And once we expose the board, his phone buzzed again. The message made him pause, his expression shifting from determination to shock. Senator Phillips wants to talk. He says he has information about something called Project Legacy. Mitchell's eyes widened. Project Legacy? That's mentioned in some of the encrypted files we found, but we couldn't crack the details. Whatever it is, they went to extreme lengths to hide it. Then let's go hear what the senator has to say, Jordan decided, already moving toward the doors. As they prepared to leave, Darius noticed a pattern in the financial documents. These shell companies, they all trace back to the same law firm in Washington. The same firm that tried to cyberattack our investigation. No coincidence, Mitchell noted, adding another string to the evidence wall. They're getting sloppy, making mistakes. Fear does that. Jordan's expression hardened as pieces fell into place. No coincidence at all. The law firm, the shell companies, the board, it's all connected. And we're getting close. Outside, the press conference had evolved into breaking news coverage as more arrests were announced. Each hour brought new revelations and new connections to powerful figures. But in that Washington office, the mysterious man made another call, his voice carrying a deadly calm. Implement Contingency Plan Delta. The board is moving to secure mode. And the Carter brothers? The voice asked. Handle it. Whatever it takes. This ends now. The pieces were falling into place, but the game was far from over. As Darius and Jordan prepared to head to Washington to interview Senator Phillips, both brothers knew they were moving into even more dangerous territory. The visible part of the corruption had been exposed. Now they were hunting bigger prey, the unseen powers that had built and profited from this system of injustice. And those powers were preparing to fight back. 2 weeks after his wrongful arrest in Mill Creek, Darius Carter stood at his office window in Atlanta, watching the city buzz with morning activity. The familiar skyline looked different now. Everything appeared altered after what he had witnessed. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the battle they were still fighting. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Senator Phillips pleads guilty in nationwide corruption case. The headline was accompanied by a photo of the once powerful Judiciary Committee chairman being led into federal court, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange, his arrogant demeanor shattered by the harsh reality of his circumstances. Jordan's message followed moments later. Turn on GNN. You'll want to see this. We're about to shake the foundations. Darius flipped on the wall-mounted screen just in time to catch the breaking news. The anchor's voice was grave. In a shocking development, 12 federal judges have been indicted following revelations of systematic corruption in the criminal justice system. The investigation, which began with a wrongful arrest in Mill Creek, has exposed what prosecutors are calling an unprecedented network of corruption spanning multiple states and jurisdictions. The scene cut to Jordan, standing at a DOJ podium in Washington, his presence commanding attention. Today's indictments represent the largest judicial corruption case in American history. These judges didn't just accept bribes. They actively participated in a system designed to profit from racial profiling and false imprisonment. The depth of this conspiracy has shocked even our most seasoned investigators. Marcus Jackson, no longer undercover, entered Darius's office without knocking. The former cellmate, who had turned out to be a federal agent, now headed a DOJ task force investigating similar corruption schemes nationwide. His expression was grim but determined. "Thought you'd want to see this firsthand," Jackson said, placing a thick file on Darius's desk. "Complete list of Mill Creek's victims. We're starting the process of overturning their convictions. Each case reveals more corruption, more lives destroyed for profit." Darius opened the file, his heart heavy as he scanned the names. Hundreds of lives disrupted, families torn apart, futures stolen. All to feed a machine built on prejudice and profit. Each page told a story of injustice, of systematic targeting and false imprisonment. "How many have we freed so far?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. 57 as of this morning, Jackson replied, taking a seat. "Each case we review reveals more corruption. Judge Harrison's files alone led us to over 30 wrongful convictions. But that's just the beginning. We're finding similar patterns in other jurisdictions." The TV continued its coverage, cutting to a reporter standing outside Regional Resource Management's headquarters. Federal agents raided the private prison contractors' offices early this morning. Sources say executives are cooperating with investigators, providing evidence about what they call the board, a shadowy group of power brokers who allegedly orchestrated the entire scheme. Special Agent Mitchell appeared in the doorway, her presence a reminder of how far they'd come since that night in Mill Creek. "We found their projection models," she announced, dropping another file on Darius's desk. They were planning to replicate the system in 50 more jurisdictions, a conservative estimate of potential victims exceeding 10 million per year. The implications were staggering. The machine they had uncovered wasn't just about Mill Creek or even one state. It was a blueprint for nationwide corruption, a system designed to turn justice into a commodity. Jordan called, his voice carrying the weight of new discoveries. "Phillips gave us everything, brother, names, dates, offshore accounts, the whole operation. And it goes higher than we imagined, cabinet-level officials, corporate executives, even foreign investors. They called it demographic resource management, a fancy term for targeted imprisonment for profit." Through his window, Darius could see news vans gathering outside his office building. His story, the wrongful arrest that exposed everything, had become a symbol of the larger fight for justice. But with that spotlight came risk. "Project Legacy," Mitchell said, spreading documents across Darius's desk. That's what they called their expansion plan. Mill Creek was just the prototype. They were building a network of private detention centers, complete with their own corrupt judges and law enforcement. The scope of it is beyond anything we've seen before. The TV showed footage of the Mill Creek police station, now under federal oversight. Officer Peters had been promoted to interim chief, tasked with rebuilding the department from the ground up. The young officer, who had chosen to stand against corruption, was becoming a symbol of reform. In related news, the anchor continued, the Senate Judiciary Committee has announced comprehensive hearings on private prison contracts and judicial appointments. Sources say the investigation has revealed systematic corruption in the appointment process going back over 2 decades. Lisa Parker appeared on screen, testifying before a Senate committee. The former assistant who had helped expose the corruption spoke with quiet determination. "They had quotas," she explained to the senators. "Not just for arrests but for assets. Each arrest had to yield a minimum value in seized property. They turned justice into a business model." Darius's phone buzzed with another alert, a message from an encrypted number. "The board sends its regards. This isn't over. Every empire needs its examples." Jackson noticed Darius's expression. "They're getting desperate. The entire network is unraveling." Judge Blackwood attempted to flee to the Cayman Islands this morning. The FBI intercepted him at the airport and found him with a thumb drive full of offshore account numbers. The television displayed new footage of federal agents escorting executives from Regional Resource Management's headquarters in handcuffs. The company's CEO, Thomas Blackwood, Judge Blackwood's brother, had apparently tried to destroy evidence upon learning of the raid. 6 other private prison companies are now under investigation, Mitchell added. Their stocks are plummeting. The entire industry is facing congressional scrutiny. But the real story lies in where the money is going. We've traced payments through shell companies in Dubai, Singapore, and the Caymans. Jordan's voice came through on the speaker. The international task force just moved on the financial side. Raids are happening in 3 countries. Banking records, corporate documents, everything they tried to conceal offshore, we're uncovering it all. A new face appeared on the television screen. Senator Robert Phillips, looking haggard in his prison jumpsuit. I am here today to confess my role in what can only be described as a criminal enterprise operating within our justice system for years. We used my position on the Judiciary Committee to appoint corrupt judges, approve private prison contracts, and protect a network of corruption that spanned the nation. Darius watched the confession with mixed emotions. Phillips had been one of the architects of the system that had nearly ruined his life. Now he was just another domino falling, revealing more corruption with each new statement. We're receiving calls from other jurisdictions, Jackson reported. Officers wanting to come clean. Judges are ready to cooperate. The entire corrupt machine is beginning to crumble. But the board isn't finished, Darius interjected. They're moving assets, destroying records, eliminating loose ends. 3 potential witnesses have already vanished. They're fighting back. As if to emphasize his point, Darius's computer screen suddenly went dark, followed by his phone and the office lights. Cyber attack, Mitchell said grimly, already on her secure line. They're trying to knock out our systems and corrupt the evidence, but we're prepared for them. Everything is backed up on secure DOJ servers. The lights flickered back on, but the message was clear. The board wasn't going down without a fight. Through his window, Darius could see more media arriving, while protesters gathered with signs demanding justice reform. His case had sparked a national conversation about corruption, race, and power, but that conversation came with risks. A young man entered his office, another victim of Mill Creek's corrupt system. Mr. Carter, I spent 8 months in prison before my family could prove that the drugs were planted. Your case exposed what they did to all of us. Darius gestured for him to sit. This was why they couldn't stop. They couldn't back down. Too many lives had been destroyed, too many families shattered. The board's threats meant nothing compared to the human cost of their corruption. Jordan appeared in the doorway, having flown in from Washington. The brothers shared a look of determination. Ready for Phase 2? Jordan asked. Phase 2. We've exposed the corrupt officials, the judges, the local operators. Now we go after the real power. The corporate boards, the international financiers, the politicians who protected them, the ones who built this machine and profited from it. Mitchell's phone buzzed with new intelligence. Board members are moving money out of the country. Private jets are filing flight plans. They're running. Let them run, Jordan said firmly. We've got international warrants ready, every airport, every border crossing. They've got nowhere to hide. The TV displayed more breaking news. International investigation launched into private prison investment network. The corruption had gone global, and so had the fight against it. In Washington, in a dimly lit office, a man in an expensive suit watched his empire crumble. He picked up his phone. Implement the contingency plan. All of them make examples. But back in Atlanta, Darius wasn't afraid. Let them come. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation just proves why this fight matters. His wrongful arrest had started this, but the story was bigger now. It was about systemic corruption, about justice for sale, about power used to destroy lives for profit. Sir, his assistant appeared. There's a call from Geneva regarding banking records and the board's international operations. Jordan smiled grimly. They thought they could hide behind offshore accounts and shell companies, but money leaves trails, and we're following every lead. The entire corrupt machine is coming down. Outside, the protesters' chants grew louder, while inside, federal agents continued building their case. Somewhere between those two forces, justice was finally being served. The board had constructed their machine on racism and greed, turning prejudice into profit. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had arrested the wrong man on the wrong night. Now their empire was falling piece by corrupt piece. To be continued, flashed across the screen as another breaking news alert began. But this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a revolution in justice sparked by one traffic stop on a quiet road in Mill Creek, and it was far from over. But before you go, tell us in the comments. How many innocent lives does it take to build an empire of corruption? In Mill Creek, they had it down to a science until one wrongful arrest reminded them that justice has a way of finding its own path home. Sometimes through a simple phone call that brings down an entire system. If you want to discover more stories that expose the dark corners of American injustice, like and subscribe, because some stories don't end when the gavel falls. They're just beginning.